Hey friends, and welcome to
Huh.
our final McFinal group gathering for the bridge. I'm here with Martina, who I'm so excited to meet. And we were actually talking before I hit record, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so good. I have to hit record so the rest of the group can hear the story." Let me give a little bit of context to the group about what we were talking about before, so you can just dive in to the story of the village with no men, which is fascinating. I haven't heard the end yet, so I'm pumped to hear it. So Martina is an epidemiologist, and she's really in the line of fire right now, trying to keep science alive for us right here in America. And she focuses on women's reproductive health. But she's also very interested in resource limited settings where she comes from in Africa, places like Ghana, Kenya, and others. Her dream is to bring these worlds together, and she was telling me about this amazing village, the village of no men. Would you keep telling us about this,
Yeah,
Martina? Yeah.
absolutely. So I have two lines of research, and I'm really glad that I held on to those because I am able to kind of be really strategic about how I go about my work and my funding. So I have the head work, which is my brain injury work, and that is mostly what kind of like brings in, the funding resources, and that really focuses on traumatic brain injury, mostly concussion, and how it affects women's reproductive outcomes. And then my heart, my passion work is my global health work. And that really stems from my childhood experiences growing up in Ghana, West Africa. And so the heart work really focuses on gendered norms and how those norms may affect outcomes in mostly women. I've worked in Ghana, where I'm from, Nigeria, Kenya, Malawi, and Rwanda. And last year, I had the wonderful opportunity of visiting Kenya for the second time. And what was really fascinating for me in going to Kenya was um, there were signs everywhere. Basically, sort of like what would you call it? Like public health announcements or public health agendas, basically against gender-based violence, and it was really, really fascinating. And so, delving deeper into this difference that I see in Kenya compared to like Ghana, I was inquiring and I got to learn a little bit more in my researching about why there were just so much public health messaging. That's the word, public health messaging against gender-based violence. Is that Kenyan, for some reason, there's a very high rates of femicide in Kenya. And I also got to learn that one of the strategies that some of the women have taken was to basically sort of isolate themselves and found a village called the village with no men. So it's literally a village of all Kenyan women who have experienced some form of gender-based violence, right? And they live in their community of all women, no men are there. And if they have any male children, the boys are kicked out of the village at the age of 16. My dream would be to study this village of women. It like just understand how they got to where they are. At what point do you say you're fed up? Right? What resources do you have to band together in an environment where really, even though there are all these signs, it's also kind of taboo, right? Like it's filled with shame be having experiencing this, but to be able to find a community enough to form a village where you all move to. I was on BBC News actually. There are videos, if you Google it, like you find a YouTube videos about this village, and it's actually quite exclusive. You can't just enter. You need special permission to enter, because you can't just go and kind of like warp their peace. And then at the age of 16, they let any boy, any boys who are there, you go and you spend your life in the world. And I would love to also see what comes of the boys, right? Like, are they different? Like, do they end up, or do they end up in a situation where they are either, do they end up in a GBV, like gender-based violence situation in some way, shape, or form? Like, what happens to those boys?
Right, right. Okay. This is reminding me so much of this study. I mean, obviously, I know that, people are not baboons, but there was a baboon study that may or may not be, tell us anything about our own behavior. But there was a study done with this whole, I believe baboon was the monkey species, where a big portion of the males actually left the tribe because there was a nearby or not tribe, left
Mm.
the left
Hmm.
their group. I don't know what you call a group,
Yeah.
But they left the group to because there was a construction site nearby, and the construction workers in this jungle habitat were
Hmm.
throwing away their food refuse, and so they were
Oh,
like, "Oh, great, free food!" So they just like moved
huh.
camp and they went over there and they started eating all of the refuse, but then they got really, really sick.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
all of the males died off. And so
Oh, wow.
you were left with this kind of matriarchal group of baboons, and
Yeah.
they had all the children there. And the scientists who were watching this were, noticing that all of the violence in the group, in the village, for lack of a better word, had totally eradicated, and it was this totally peaceful matriarchal society. And they were treating each other with care, but they were really worried because there was a the in I think it was a baboon group. Um, in this species, the male offspring are supposed to go off to other groups at some point when they mature enough to find a mate.
Mm.
So they were
Yeah.
really worried that these guys wouldn't have the wherewithal to
Yeah.
defend themselves,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
be, I guess, in our human sense, masculine
Yeah.
enough to survive.
Yeah.
And you know what?
Hmm.
These young boys that went off to join other groups actually ended up becoming leaders in the other groups.
Amazing.
How fascinating is that?
Amazing.
Not, I mean, I guess we're
No, no.
the
You hit
logical
on
conclusion of this
something.
is a little scary, but
No, it's spot on because that really would be what I would love to explore, right? Like, so I have been ruminating about this idea of male role models. Like, is there a way that we can create, male role models in communities that basically sort
oh,
of like become the spokespersons again? So exactly what you're saying. Do these boys, when they go out into the norm, the real world, do they kind of are they able to become role models for their peers to say that is inappropriate, like over the trajectory of their lives, right? So one of the projects that I'm also working on is actually male midwives in Ghana.
whoa.
Yeah. So it's so fascinating. Like I love taboo topics and I love topics that give you that kind of reaction.
Yes.
So when I first heard of it, I was like, what are you talking about? Like male midwives? Like what? But there is like I was like, where are we gonna find them? Well, first and foremost, there's a Facebook group of over 500 male midwives in Ghana, number one. And when we published our first paper, which was a lit review, we found out there were male midwives in Ethiopia. They found me on LinkedIn. Like they friended me on LinkedIn, male midwives in Ethiopia, male midwives there's some in Australia, New Zealand. There's French communities of male midwives, but we are now doing in-person interviews and hopefully I'll be able to share the video because my goal is to have the qualitative components actually be disseminated other than a manuscript, but in a video format. So we're interviewing some of the male midwives as well as us to basically I would love to see can we use male midwives to become role models for other to bring men, right? To bring paternal care into the maternal child health framework. Because dads tend to be excluded, right? But in a context like in the African context where the man is supposed to be like the sole head of the household and bring in revenue and take care of the family, it's a lot of pressure, right? But if you have, and the male midwives told us, they said when I meet like the future dad, I'm able to talk to him man to man, and I'm saying, hey, here's why you need to be there when your woman is during labor, right? Because culturally in Ghana, for example, men don't go into the laboring ward. Men stay on the outside, but they're able to convince the males, the fathers, to say, come in, support your wife. You're her best person, the best support person for her in this situation. You can advocate for her. So I would love to explore male role models.
This is blowing my mind. I don't even want to talk about the text that we have assigned for today because
Yay!
you are fascinating. Okay, I mean, it's hard for me to even talk about birth without crying because my own
Yeah.
birth experience was very traumatic, but also very
Yeah.
profound. And what I mean, it was the probably the profound experience of my life.
Mm,
And
beautiful.
I think that I just think about what would it do if men were not just invited but expected to be a part
Mm,
of this experience? How would that change their views of
yeah.
motherhood? How would that change their views of women?
Yeah.
How would that change their view of their role in all of this? I mean,
Yeah.
this is it's a it's a rite of passage for sure.
Yeah.
And for them to be invited into that right,
Yeah,
to hold responsibility in that right.
exactly.
God, the power of that.
Exactly. Yep. They belong, but they have to feel like they belong and it's acceptable,
Right.
right? And we as we can say as much as we want to, but men and women present differently to the world, right? So when you meet someone who can talk guy to guy,
Yeah.
right, in a cultural situation where men, are somewhat machismo, and here you have a male, and what we found in the literature also is that a lot of teenage girls who find themselves pregnant prefer the male midwives. And you may think, oh my God, that's so weird. Like, why would a teenage girl? But they don't judge the girls. They simply are like, I am here to deliver a child and take care of you. And they are so tender and so caring. And we found this generational gap. So, first time parents were like, no way, I am not having a male midwife. But teenage girls, for example, older women, because they don't care. And here's what's really, really amazing. Culture. So Ghana also has a very large Muslim community.
Mhm.
And most of these male midwives, and no, it's not that it's a Muslim community, but the Muslim communities are also rather north. So it takes a while to get there. So the government created this male midwifery program to place a lot of these male midwives in those communities to decrease maternal mortality, right?
Can
And
you
guess what?
explain
When they
that?
start,
How does it decrease? Go, yeah, sorry.
yes, so it's because of access to care. So there's this the predictors of maternal, poor maternal outcomes, maternal mortality can really be framed by three things. So they're called the three delays. The first is simply the delay in getting like educated about the care that you need, right? The second is actually the delay in actually getting to the care. And the third is actually the delay in getting the appropriate care that you need once you're in the appropriate context, right? So in the US, the third delay is what a lot of what a lot of women may experience, and a lot of minority women may experience. They're in these amazing facilities, but they may not be getting the appropriate care that they need.
Right.
The second delay is what a lot of people in resource limited settings experience. They're not able to get to the delay, they're not able to get to the facility either due to geographic barriers, right? Transportation barriers, economic barriers, and a woman's pregnancy is actually a community affair.
Hmm.
She actually women in like Muslim communities, for example, I'm not to generalize, but a few of these Muslim communities you don't determine how you get to your care because it's a financial decision that's made,
Right.
right? So getting to that care, so then the Ghanaian government just said, why don't we bring the care to the women then, right? If they can't get to the right facilities, why don't we train midwives to get to those facilities? But gender came to play because if you train only females as midwives, again, in the Ghanaian context, a woman doesn't decide that I'm going to move up north to make more money. Because when she moves, her entire family moves with her, right? And moving like a man from his job from, somewhere, but it's easier for a man to say, I am going to move my entire family into a completely different geographic region, be the primary breadwinner, and have my wife stay home and take care of my kids, right?
Yeah.
So the Ghanaian government then decided to really invest in training men as midwives, right? To fulfill this whole idea of like expectation of being the primary breadwinner, bringing in money. And here's an interesting thing. Traversing the terrain. So in northern Ghana, getting to different places is incredibly difficult because of the terrain. The road infrastructure may be poor. When we have monsoon weather, the roads get flooded. Men can ride those motorcycles fearlessly. Women usually don't, right?
Fascinating.
So it blew me away. But here's what's really awesome. When they started this program, they trained the male midwifery program, I think ran from 2013 to 2015, I think. If I'm getting the day, I may be getting the dates wrong, but they trained a ton of male midwives, and a lot of them actually were Muslim. So think about Muslim religion, right? Where you can't touch someone of the opposite sex
Yeah.
unless you are somewhat related to them or unless you get another man's permission, right? So these male midwives would need the male to touch me as a pregnant woman. Don't need permission either from my husband, from my brother, somebody. But I just find it so fascinating that these Muslim men volunteered or chose to go and train in this program because they saw their female partners or their female sisters, right? They saw their sisters, their cousins suffering. And when we interviewed them, that's exactly what they said. They were like, we just couldn't sit back and see our sisters dying.
God.
So they elected. It just blew me away. And you know, when you talk to them, it's not even about the culture doesn't even come to play. One of the examples that one of the male midwives gave us was a woman came in dressed head to toe, right? Covered up. Only her eyes were showing.
Mhm.
And here she was about to get into labor. And he said that he could hear the conversation between his female colleague and the woman's husband. And basically, the female colleague was saying the male midwife is going to be taking care of your wife or your partner. Oh, are we frozen? Did we cut off for a little bit?
No, no, you're perfect.
Okay. And he said like the husband was like, "What do you mean? Like I no, right?" And so he went in and he spoke to the man and he said, I'll be taking good care of your wife. Trust me, inshallah. Like, right, the cultural barrier is broken
Mhm.
right there. She's in good hands. The woman delivered. He was like, she didn't need any suturing, right? He said, I took perfect care of her. And when I finished, I just went to him and I said, your beautiful baby is born. And he said, then I just went behind the scenes. I had done my job.
I'm in tears. This is such a
Ah,
beautiful story and such a beautiful
thank
practice.
you.
It makes me think a lot about, so we've been reading Arthur Frank, right? The Wounded Storyteller. And for him,
Yeah.
he's talking about ethics. He's talking about ontology,
Hmm.
the beginning, how we are as beings, how we operate. And for him, ethics begins at shared suffering, shared mortality. It begins at
Yeah.
death.
Mm.
How we treat each other should always be inspired by the fact that we are all one day going to die, right? We're all
Yep.
capable of suffering, and none of us is above or below anybody else in that respect. And that's the beginning of
Yeah.
ethics. This turns that on its head, and it says, no, the beginning is birth, not death.
Mm. Oh,
I mean,
that's
how
beautiful.
beautiful is the concept that if we are
Oh,
invited into the literal birth
hmm.
process, that
Yeah.
ethics begins in this space where we learn to
Love
take
that.
care of each other, not just from a gendered perspective, but from
Yeah.
and I mean, I love how, now we have clash of culture, clash of religion, and yet all of these
Yeah.
clashes are dissolving in the moment of this birth
Yes.
process.
Oh, I love how you see that. That's beautiful. Yeah,
Oh gosh,
absolutely.
brings tears to my eyes. So
Oh,
what do next steps look like for you as you are imagining how to bridge these two fields you said in your
yeah.
head, in epidemiology and your true wisdom and care
Yeah.
come about and care for these communities in Africa?
Thank you. To tell you the truth, I have to be frank and I have to say that I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't know because as much as we don't want to admit it, money runs the world and we need funding to let this work to for this work to continue. And right now there's a xenophobic when a xenophobic funding structure, right? And I understand America first, right? Like, if you look at maternal mortality, for example, we need to take care of Black women who die needlessly in the States. It just makes absolutely no sense. The maternal mortality rates are highest amongst Black women, even in like the city of Pittsburgh, where I live has the highest maternal mortality rate for Black women compared to other cities, other sister cities. And Pittsburgh is beautiful, right? We have the Steelers. Like we should have resources going from football to that, right? It just doesn't blow, it doesn't make any sense. So
It doesn't compute.
from it doesn't compute. So I understand, right? So I'm also involved in a lot of work here too in the States. I'm part of a center called Embrace, where we really explore reproductive justice, and how just access to care and how politics policies can really influence public health. So I get it. America first, we need to ensure that because as a first world country that is so highly resourced, we should not have some of the disease burdens and mortality rates that we see in certain communities. On the other hand, I think that there is also a lot to learn. And I think that people are beginning to really realize this. And the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, I think, always got this, that there are certain strategies, policies, practices in other parts of the world that can benefit the United States.
Mm,
So there's a bidirectionality that I think that has been overlooked over the years because there's been this top-down approach of high income, providing to low resource settings. And that's not really always the case because you see so much creativity when you travel outside the United States. ChatGPT was first created in Kenya.
no way. I had no idea.
Yes. The
Who created?
programmers of ChatGPT were Kenyans.
That is
Uber,
cool.
Uber and Lyft came from Zimbabwe,
Fascinating.
right? So
Why don't we know about this?
EMS, ambulances, first came from Black communities in the city of Pittsburgh. Can
Wow.
you believe it? There's a book called Sirens, and literally, I think it's called Sirens. I'll have to find it, but it's literally talks about the founding of emergency medical services in Black communities down the street from me, half an hour drive in the city of Pittsburgh.
Wow.
Right. So I think that there perhaps this is a great time to start realigning things and maybe viewing things kind of like reorganizing things. And, America first, fantastic. However, I think that maybe those of us in the global health practices or those of us who practice in rural settings can start thinking of a way that we can frame our work in a bi-directional sort of model,
Yeah.
right? Where it's really mutually beneficial. One of a student actually brought this to me during the pandemic, one of my students, and she was a medical student, and she was like, I want to look at it as like on a trans cultural way. And she wouldn't move from it. And she was like, I hope you're okay. I was like, of course I'm okay with that. So we ended up doing a transcultural exploration of how COVID was affecting pregnant women in Ghana and the United States. It was beautiful. They got to find out that the experiences were quite similar between both places. There were some cultural nuances, but in the end, both women in both settings were having a really difficult time accessing care, right? And these were affluent women. Some women actually moved themselves to be closer to the hospital so that they're able to just immediately go and seek care, similar to the States. So I think that this is really an opportunity to really think, how can this benefit both groups versus top down? There's also bottom up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure that this is a bigger systemic problem than my simple understanding of it, or simple solutions might try to fix. But if you could make one change in the US and the way we do delivery or even just pregnancy in the US, what change do you think we could make? Or what one thing could we learn from other cultures that would make big impact here? I know I'm oversimplifying terribly.
Yeah, that's a big, big question.
Yeah.
A big change in the US. Well, we've interviewed dads who have witnessed their partners pass away
Oh,
or experience really terrible treatment during birthing. And it's mostly minority dads. And the one thing that we have heard them say a lot of times is, I had a voice that was not being heard,
oh yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think that the patient, how do I frame this? And maybe from my own experience too. So one of my, I don't know if I shared this with you all, but I have triplets and I have an older child
That's
too. So
right. Yeah,
yes.
I've forgotten. Oh my gosh, yes. And you've written a book
So
about this.
yeah, I've
Yeah.
written a book, like, and it's actually a humorous book. So one of the triplets ended up, they were born at 36 weeks, which was amazing. But about a month or so, my youngest, like baby C, ended up having to be hospitalized because she had RSV
Hmm.
and she literally could not catch her breath,
Oh,
right?
so scary.
It was terrifying. And I remember the nurses in the room and they were like, oh, I mean, the literature says X, Y, and Z, but she doesn't fit the criteria. And as a mom watching my daughter gasping, I was like, I don't care what the literature says.
Right.
Let's give it a try.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was so firm. I was so adamant. I was so angry. And they gave it a try. And my daughter was fine, right?
Yeah.
My daughter, but I had to fight for that, right? And I stood my ground. So I think if there is one big change, it would be the patient's voice matters, right? There's medicine. Yeah, you've gone to medical school, you've studied the textbooks, but you don't know it all. I'm sorry, my lived experience also counts for something. So
Yeah.
listen to me once in a while when I tell you this may not be good for my partner, or this may be good for my partner, right? I know that person best, and I also have a say. So for
Absolutely.
me, that would really be the one thing that I've heard.
Oh gosh, this is the third time you've made me cry this call, Martina. Ah, I,
Sorry, this was so
no, I couldn't agree
unexpected.
more. I couldn't agree more. And we keep using these like big ethical terms, throughout our readings, like multivocality, and what you're describing is just the simplest, most
It
obvious
really
thing
is.
to
Yeah.
describe that as an ethic that that other voices matter.
Yeah.
Earlier you were talking about, this is a great time for us to realign and reorganize and to look at transcultural ways of doing
Mhm.
medicine. And I actually wrote this word down as you were talking and I circled it, humility. We don't have it, that I feel like in general in American healthcare, there's a hubris, because we see ourselves at least as a world power, and
Yeah.
we should be at the forefront of this, but we're not. And I think we're missing out on a lot of
Yeah.
wisdom here because
Yeah.
we have that hubris. And
Hmm.
a lot of the wisdom comes from the patients themselves
Hmm.
and the people who love these patients,
Yeah.
and who've been with them through it all. You know, I I know um I'm no physician or nor epidemiologist. I just do, preventative wellness with,
It's
massage and yoga
important.
therapy, but I always tell my patients, they ask me what's wrong and I'm like, you know your body best. You tell me, I can tell you a little bit about what I know, but we really have to meet in the middle here,
Yeah.
because nobody know no nobody knows your body better than you do.
Hmm.
And I think that probably matters most during pregnancy.
Oh
I,
God.
as you're talking, as you said, I had a voice that hadn't been heard. I mean, that was my refrain during my birthing process. I didn't feel
Mm.
believed. I didn't feel heard. And then
Yes.
when time came,
Yes.
I didn't agree with a lot what was being done.
Oh.
And I realized I'm not the exception
Hmm.
here. Like I am the
Yeah.
rule. This is how it
Hmm.
goes. And the more women I
Wow.
talked to about this after the experience, the more we felt like, why aren't people talking about this?
Yeah.
Why, what is the taboo, to borrow a word you used earlier, that keeps us silent here?
Yeah.
Um, and I couldn't agree with you more. It's a system-wide
Hmm.
problem. And
Yeah. I'm so sorry to
oh,
hear
yeah.
that.
Well, like I said, I know I'm not alone here. And that's, I think, one reason why you and I both want to do this work in narrative medicine. It's
Yeah.
all a process of restoring voice
Yeah.
and restoring
Absolutely.
listening.
Absolutely.
So I'd love to hear, just in general, high level for you now, like how is what we've been studying impacting the work that you do or want to do? How is narrative medicine fitting in with, the projects of your heart and your head as they come together?
Oh, yeah. I love this question because I've actually put this into practice. So as I mentioned, I'm part of that Embrace network. And we really focus on birth outcomes in in mostly the Pittsburgh area,
Mm.
improving birth outcomes, mostly maternal mortality in minority populations.
Mm.
And I've always wanted, I feel like I've always been a storyteller in some way, shape, or form.
I
And
hear
it
it.
really came to light when I had the triplets because I would blog just about the insanity of everything. I was also in grad school at the time, by the way. I started grad school with 4 kids under four. Like, I'm crazy like that. Um, but at some
Wow.
point, it was not only ridiculous, it was ludicrous. Like my
Yeah.
life was hilarious because it just didn't make any sense. So I started blogging about it. And then the blog post then eventually became a book. But I'd always say you have a knack for storytelling, but I bring humor into it for the most part. Um, and as time has gone on and I doing my work, I have really loved that. I love hearing people's stories. But for me, the fascinating point for me is always the tipping point. At what point does one decide to make a decision? I like when I talked about the women in the village, the tipping point is always for me. At what point did someone say, enough, I am going to go and form a village? Like what sparked that? I'm fascinated by that tipping point. So I reached out to the directors of the Embrace. That's what kind of like motivated me to take the course, just to understand how we bring narration and storytelling into interventions that we give patients. And so I reached out to the directors of our Embrace network and I said to them, I have always done this workshop about life course trajectory. So I literally walk the audience or the audience through what brought us to where we are currently. What were those pivotal moments? And they literally create like trajectories, like almost like the EKG, if you will, like an EKG reading, peaks and valleys. But what I brought from this course was actually I had them also actually tell their stories to each other. So they had groups. And in those groups, they then shared what were those peaks and valleys in your life, right?
Mm.
It wasn't about how they necessarily overcame them because I'm not a fan of the word resilience. I resent the word resilience actually, but I just wanted to give them the space to just say, this was my experience. And this is what became of me through that experience. And this is how I got here. It's actually called the hero's journey. I use the hero's journey framework to frame all of this. And I'm sure you've heard of it.
Yes, of course.
Um, and it was profound. It
Mm.
was and I don't think that I would have had the gumption to frame the work the way that I did had I not taken this course.
Mm.
And my goal would be to develop some kind of like systematic, right? Like science, clinically or not clinically oriented, but sort of like, an intervention. But, when you talk about like, I'm doing a yoga intervention, you literally have to outline exactly the different poses that you're doing. So it really, almost like a guidebook. I need like a
Sure.
guidebook or some kind of manual. That's what it is. I need to manualize it in some way, shape, or form. I will love to manualize the workshop and have it be an actual intervention that can be delivered to my
Mhm.
study population, right? Like you're
Mhm.
talking about your birth experience. How do we, there's actually literature to show the application of the hero's journey for women who have gone through birthing and how they turn the traumatic experience into not necessarily a positive, but I saw themselves as a hero emerging out of that experience. And you've touched on it a little bit when you said you talked to other women and you were like, why are we living in silence? There's like a hero brewing a little bit. And I give people the permission to be heroes, right? We don't, as women, as mothers especially, we're always, sort of like, oh, it's not a big deal. It's all about my kids. But no, I want us to stand in that glory and really say, I was a hero, not because I brought a child into the world, but despite what I experienced, that traumatic experience, I brought other people to also tell their stories in a
Yeah.
powerful way to change the future. That's my goal.
I mean, yes. Yes, this is the goal. I love it. And I love the reframe that you've made here. A powerful one for me to hear right now because I feel like so much that is going on in the world in this particular moment can feel um, like it's impossible to get anything good done. And it feels, I think, very disempowering just to be a human in the world.
Yeah.
today. And
Yeah.
the reframe is, at what point do we decide to make a change? And
Hmm.
that's, you got to be in a valley to decide enough. And maybe
100%.
that's the opportunity here. That's the reframe. And this is
Yeah.
the point where we say enough, where
Yeah.
we make our own village, not excluding men in this in this
Yeah.
analogy,
Yep.
but we decide to make our own village and we decide what it looks like. And I
Yeah.
love too the metaphor of the hero's journey because
Hmm.
for anybody who's watching, and please chime in if I get any of this wrong, the hero's journey is a Jungian concept that describes when the hero literally
Hmm.
goes to an underworld of sorts,
Yeah.
has to face things from their past, from
Hmm.
a cultural present, has to do the hard,
Yep.
scary work that they don't want to do in order to retrieve something of value
You got it.
from the
Spot
underworld.
on.
And
Spot
then
on.
you take that back and you come back changed. So
Hmm.
the treasure is really some new wisdom that you gain, that
Yeah.
maybe the object symbolizes, but that hero comes back a hero.
Hmm.
But the suffering is
Absolutely.
necessary. And it reminds me a little bit of the what Arthur Frank called the pedagogy of suffering,
Yeah.
leaning
Yeah.
into leaning into what suffering has
Yeah.
to teach us and how it
Yeah.
how it may be able to change us. So what a reframe here. It's not about resilience in the sense that
No.
actually let me hear it from you. What is your beef with the word resilience and what's a better
I
word?
despise resilience.
Tell me more. Tell me more.
Oh my God. But yes, so I've done so much work on resilience. But I think at some point I just was like, resilience is not necessary
Mm,
because I do not need to endure the suffering. Right? Can my life be a little bit better so that I do not need to be resilient? We celebrate the strong woman all the time.
mm,
Right? Even when she's in the abyss, she needs to still pull through. And people are like, oh, you're so strong. I think part of it really came from my own experience of having to myself self-chosen torture, really, of having like four kids under four and going through grad school and coming out top of my class and getting a faculty appointment right away. Da, 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 da. Fantastic, wonderful, exhausting,
mhm,
exhausting, right? Can we have systems in place that really allow all of us to have some aspect of soft life, if you will, right? So that I don't need to hang on to this notion of resilience in order to get through life. And in fact, I was like, at some point, I just sort of like just started saying it out loud because my girlfriends would send me all these, gifts and everything. Oh, superwoman, I can do what doesn't break me, doesn't kill me. And I was like, no.
You don't got a
What
break.
Exactly. That's exactly what I said. What doesn't break me make me stronger. Oh, I cannot stand that phrase. No, I didn't
Martina,
have to break to begin with.
you are turning the ethic on its head again in such a profound way. And I think it actually begins. We've been talking about Arthur Frank in the Wounded Storyteller. The ethics begins at shared suffering. Ethics begin
Yeah,
at the moment of shared mortality, really at death. And earlier we were talking about reframing that. Bringing it now to birth and to this pulling together
yeah,
of community during the birth experience as being the beginning of the ethic. And now you're saying, actually, if we get rid of this ethic that says that we should treat each other kindly because we're all going to suffer, we don't need to suffer in order to treat each other kindly. We need to
yeah,
build systems that create soft life. I love that phrase that
yes.
you used,
Hmm.
soft life. you know
Yeah,
um and you said earlier we can stand in that glory.
hmm, yeah,
We
I
don't
really
have to
believe in
stand
that.
in our suffering to make
No, no,
that
no.
happen. Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah. I think we need permission, especially as women, to stand in our glory. And I think as men too, right? Men sort of at some point are built, society expects them to be really strong and machismo and not show any emotion and da da da. And really having, like I want my sons to be able to just be with their buddies and be like, hey, life is tough, like confide in each other and be like, I see you, man. Like you don't have to get into the details of it, right? But like, or when you're doing amazing, men always have this, they always, deference. There was like, oh, I did it for the family, I did it for da da da. I would love them to be celebrated
Yeah.
as well,
Yeah.
right? And stand in that glory of being able to be the provider. Yeah, I mean, and honestly, there's also literature that has shown that eventually resilience wears and tears on people. There's actually like let me see if I can find it, but there's something called this whole idea of grit actually ends up. So people who are it's interesting because resilience is highly associated with like like social support,
Mm,
right? Because of people who tend to be resilient in the literature are minority populations because they've had to overcome so much adversity, right? But over time, overcoming that amount of adversity wears and tears on them. And there's actually neurological damage. They end up actually having early onset Alzheimer's,
mm,
right? Dementia. So you can be as resilient as you want to be, right? But eventually wears and tears on the body. But it's not even like you can be as resilient as you want to be. The system is built in a way that requires that you be so resilient. But eventually there's wear and tear on your body. So to my point,
mm,
no, I don't need to have to be resilient to begin with. What can be changed in my surroundings? And really, I think that what I'm talking about may seem so high level, but I've started actually practicing it in very, very small doses.
mm, tell
And
me.
because I never give myself permission, I come from a very hard African background. You got to work hard. And achievement for me was like, having the four kids and running half marathons without training because I
Wow.
didn't think that I mean, seriously, I was like, oh my God, if I don't pass my comprehensive exams because I couldn't run the half marathon, right? Like this idea of suffering that
Yeah.
was embedded in me. And as I became older, I was just like, no, I deserve a $6 Starbucks cappuccino, right? Like, deserve that, darn it. And I've started indulging more and more in the little things, right? Life doesn't have to be hard all the time, Martina. Right? The little things. I deserve to maybe book a night at the hotel for myself and leave my family for a day. That's okay.
Hmm.
I deserve it.
Hmm.
So I've really been trying to practice it in small, small doses. Yes, I may max out my credit card, but I am happier, right? Right? So I've really been trying to practice this in small, they don't have to be big, but just the wear and tear every day becomes insurmountable at some point. And I think life can feel so exasperating. But I think really just sitting back and saying, I'm not going to conform today.
Hmm.
I'm
Hmm.
just not.
Hmm.
I am going to indulge in by myself in my car, McDonald's drive-through French fries, right?
Yeah.
And binge eat and sit in the driveway or sit down the street for a couple of hours and read a book and not have to consume scientific literature or Netflix and binge and send the kids off to bed early. I'm not being selfish. No.
Yes. Yes. Or if you are, it is okay to be, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Standing in that glory. That's
Yeah.
exactly it.
Yeah. I was just working with a group of first year medical students here in Austin at Dell Medical School. They started a similar to narrative medicine program, which I think is really cool that
Nice.
they're starting at that early stage in medical school. And
Yeah.
I was just there a couple of days ago, and they the big thing for them obviously was a feeling of overwhelm and not having
Yeah.
time for presence or connection, and missing
Yeah.
it because when it's brand new, they're in their first year, they're realizing suddenly the people that they consider their support systems, family and friends, they're not
Yeah.
getting the time with anymore. And
Yeah.
we started talking about this theory. Someone came up with the term. Micro joy is the medicine for macro
Mm.
trauma. And
Mm.
this idea that when you're going through a macro trauma, which medical school could be, or I'm sure
Okay.
lots of other things as well. But when you're going through something so incredibly life altering that it takes up all your brain space,
Yeah.
sometimes the answer for that is to let yourself have the little joys, the little moments of presence, the
Yeah.
little noticings, the little, the cup of coffee,
Yes.
the sitting in your car and reading or having, whatever comfort
Yes.
food you want. Like let yourself have the little
Absolutely.
joys.
Yeah. They go a long way. They
Yeah.
accumulate, right? They accumulate in a similar way that grit, that wear and tear accumulates. And they counterbalance each other. Like the euphoria that I have, right, of just being like, oh my God, you know. it's this coffee is delicious. And I bought it for me and for myself. And being able to treat myself to those little rewards and not expecting the world to do that. It really, like, it's amazing how much
Mhm.
it calms your nervous system down. And
Mhm.
it just feels so, so good to just give yourself like that warm hug. You worked hard. You deserve it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Martina, I feel like I could sit and talk with you for hours.
Aw.
We haven't even touched on the text, and I'm cool with that. And
Love it.
I know our hour is coming to a close. I think that actually the conversation we were just having about, allowing yourself the small indulgences and
Yeah.
permission to stand in your glory kind of does dovetail with the exercise that we were going to do. So we this week we were looking at a poem by Andrea Gibson called Angels of the Get Through. And
Mhm.
I'm thinking about how all of these little permissions you give yourself can also be angels of the get through.
Yeah.
And the reflective writing activity that I had set aside for us that maybe we could still do together um, was to write 3 lines together, just in the shadow of our conversation or of the reading or of anything you want to talk about. 3 lines that are directed toward the angel of the get through, whatever that means for you. Um, with the goal of eventually we're going to cobble together all of these lines from the people who come to the next call and
Yes.
other folks in the course who aren't able to make the calls, and we'll create a group woven poem. 3 lines.
Mm.
So I'd love to get your lines in the poem too. Are you okay with writing 3 lines with me now? We'll just take 5 minutes
Yeah,
and see what happens.
sure. Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
So
It's
three
gonna be
lines
tough.
directed toward whatever you consider to be the angel of the get through.
Hmm.
I'll set a timer here for, it probably
Okay.
won't take us a full 5 minutes. I'll set it for 3 minutes. We'll just see what happens. If we need more time, we can take it. Okay. Set timer for 3 minutes.
3 minutes, counting down.
Okay, let's finish up our last thought. I might need actually another second too.
You want me to put in the chat?
Actually, let's do a little
Share.
let's do a little performance. Um, how about let's see, do you pick a number, one or two?
Two.
Okay, so I'll go first, you go
Okay.
second. I'll read I'll read just my first line,
Okay.
and then you'll read just your first line, and then I'll read my second, you'll read the second, I'll
Oh, I
read
like it.
the third, and we'll create a
Okay.
little poem, just you and I, and then we'll weave ours
Okay.
in with the rest of the group.
Sounds great.
Okay, I already forgot. Am I one or two?
You're one.
Okay, I'm one. All right. The hero's journey begins and ends here at the place where our minds meet.
Hmm. Wow. Give yourself permission to live and freely, even when confined by outside forces.
Not over, not against, not despite, but
Hmm.
through.
You are deserving of all the happiness that life has to offer, even if it comes in small doses.
You carry me, and I will carry you.
Hmm. Counterbalance that pain and suffering with deserving, deserving of joy, of happiness, of forgiveness, of caring, to be cared for, to be coddled, treated like a precious jewel, worthy of being stolen, swooped off your feet and adorned like the precious jewels in the Louvre.
Oh, yes.
I had to bring the
Beautiful.
Louvre in there
Of
because of the
course.
heist.
Of course. And I love the little echoes of Lord in the background after all of our talk of that jewel
Yes,
from Audre Lorde.
exactly.
I
Oh, I
love
love
that we
that.
got to spend this time together.
Too. Thank
What a gift.
you.
What a treat to get to know you and your work and
Thank you.
what you're up to and where you're going. I want to be a part of it. Just let me know how I
Oh,
can
God.
support you in any way.
I
And
appreciate
I'm
it.
just excited to be your cheerleader as you do great things in the world.
Mm, let me tell you, I've always said everyone needs a cheerleader, and you literally just stole that like straight out of my brain. Thank you. You are my person.
You got that. You're mine. I love it. You're my angel of the get through
Mm,
today. I needed this.
wonderful.
I needed this. Thank you
Aw, I'm
so
so
much.
happy to hear. You're
All
more than
right. Well, I'm
welcome.
I'm gonna hit the end record for everybody
Okay.
else. See you next time and stick
Yes,
around.
absolutely.
Okay.